I love it. I love it. Well, hey, if we haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name's Ryan. I get the privilege of serving as the lead pastor here. I've been here for about 8 months, and it's been such a fantastic journey already. And we are diving in this week to a series that, quite honestly, I'm pretty excited about and might actually end up being my favorite series of the year. No, I don't know, don't set the bar too high, I guess, but it might be my favorite series of the year. It's a series that we're calling Original Faith. And in this series, we're going to be diving in original faith. You can throw that up there, Sarah. We're going to be diving into this series, right? And asking ourselves, hey, what does it actually look like to get maybe back to the rootedness of our faith that maybe has gotten lost through thousands of years and maybe has gotten hijacked in moments or had things attached to it in moments or had things kind of like stuck on it in moments that actually has led our world to reject what they thought was our faith but wasn't actually the original faith that we were first given and inspired our movement. We're going to dive into that in the sake of the series, and I don't think there's a better way or a better week to be diving into this series than on Youth Mission Sunday. Because if we look at what our students did for a week down in Kentucky, right? We look at everything that we're celebrating, everything that you heard them share about, everything that David showed you in a picture just a few minutes ago, right? Like we look at that and we go, man, like the way that they chose to live their lives for a week, right? They took a week out of their summer break. They could have done anything. But the way they chose to live their lives for a week, man, like that is exceptional. Like it's amazing, right? But I just want to say this right at the get-go of this series and right out of the gate today. What they did for a week in Kentucky, to us today feels in many ways exceptional, right? But in reality, really isn't an exception to the movement that we're a part of. And in many ways, I would even suggest to you, it's just one more great example of a lineage of great examples of people who have been living out the way of Jesus in their life and been leading out the movement that we experience today. A movement that 2,000 years ago was sparked and began to be known first as a movement called the Way, and a movement that today we now refer to as Christianity. Now, here's the thing, let me just say this about our movement, especially if you're not a part of this movement or you haven't experienced this movement personally in your life. One of the things about this movement that I think is incredible is that from its inception, our movement has sought to be an exception to the world around it. And you see this in so many ways that whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, whether you believe what we believe or not, you would probably agree with this, that like, hey, these are probably good exceptions to make within the world around us, right? You see this in so many areas. You can look at healthcare and you can see this. You can look at care for children and the poor and see this. You can look at the ways that Christians or followers of Jesus have engaged in like pursuing greater rights for all people in different situations and different moments in history and see this, right? And you can see that from its inception, Christianity became kind of this exception to the world around it. Now, even like in the earliest days of our movement, I mean, just even within 400 years of our movement beginning, you begin to see this. In fact, shortly in the early life of our movement, within the Roman Empire, you would see, you can engage with this and check this out in history, right? You'll see these moments and waves of plagues and epidemics that would spread throughout portions of or the entirety of the Roman Empire. And in fact, if you look at the way that Dionysius talks about this, he talks about this about 400 years after Jesus spent time on earth. In a season of plague and epidemic, he talks about the ways that the Roman Empire actually engaged and dealt with those who were sick and ill and infected by this epidemic. He talks specifically about his experience in the city of Alexandria. He says this, he says at the first onset of the disease, the Romans, people in the Roman Empire, right, within Alexandria, pushed the sufferers away and fled from their dearest, from the people who were closest to them. They fled from them, throwing them into the roads before they were dead, and they treated the unburied corpses as dirt, right? While at the same time, if you continue to read Dionysius' account, you'll find that Christians, followers of the Way, were the first people not to flee the city, but to actually move into the city, to actually move into the streets, and to begin to care for those who needed care, to actually provide for the sick who needed to be provided for, often at times, even to their own demise and at the expense of their own infection. They would move in to these moments. And you can continue to see this kind of a movement throughout the wave of Christianity. You can see shortly thereafter where Christians start to develop hospitals, crude hospitals at the time, but hospitals and nursing facilities in an empire where healthcare was most readily available only to those who had the ability to pay for a doctor to come and visit them in their house. Christians were creating centers of healthcare so that anyone, regardless of their means, regardless of their status, could come to them and receive what they needed and receive the solutions they needed to their health issues in moments of sickness, right? We see this in a variety of spaces. Even today, right, throughout time, you see this. And today you find, if you were to look at all the hospitals in America, even in our country, you would find that 9 of the top 10 hospitals in our country were founded by Christians, all motivated by a desire to create a center of healthcare for those who could otherwise not afford it. You see this in so many spaces. You can look at the care for children and the dignity of children that's given, right, in our world, and see the mark and the impact of the Christian faith on it. In fact, just shortly after Jesus lived, within 100 years, right, the way that the Roman Empire viewed children was as if they were worthless and had very little to offer in the world around them. In fact, Seneca, an ancient Roman historian and philosopher, within just even 100 years after the life of Jesus, was talking about the ways that they viewed children and the ways that they would treat children. He said this, he said, "We destroy monstrous births, and we also drown our children if they are born weakly or if they're unnaturally formed." And then he goes on to explain why. This is interesting. He goes, "To separate what is useless from what is sound is an act not of anger, but of reason." He goes, this is just the most logical thing to do. Why wouldn't we act and operate that way? Why wouldn't we dispose of weaker children? While at the same time, Christians were mocked and ridiculed for wading out into those same waters to rescue those children who had been discarded and to adopt those children into their own families. And you see this over and over and over again in history, to the point that even today in our own country, Christian families are 2 times more likely to adopt children in need than anyone else in our country. You see the mark of the movement in every moment and every season of history in so many ways and in so many spaces, right? In the ways that they care for the poor, the ways that they care for the less fortunate, and the ways that they provided resources for those who needed resources provided for. So much so that by the 4th century, the emperor of Rome takes note of what's happening. And he notices that charity within the Christian movement was at such a different way and level than charity within his own pagan empires and through their own pagan temples that were under his administration. So much so that he actually wrote to pagan priests to challenge them and ask them and kind of charge them to match the Christians' level of charity in their own religious spaces and through their own temples. He wrote this. Emperor Julian writes this in the 4th century. He says, "The impious Galileans," writing to his priests, the pagan priests, he says, "The impious Galileans," which is another word for Christians, "in addition to caring for their own, they support ours. And it is shameful that our poor should be wanting of our aid." In other words, come on, guys, you're making us look bad. Which in reality, he's kind of saying, guys, the Christians are making you look bad. And so step up your game and raise the level of charity happening through your own pagan temples. And let's tell you, if you go on to study history, you'll find the pagan priests did everything they could, right, to try to increase the level of charity within their own faith. But they were never able to match it to the level of charity that was being done to the movement of Christians. Because the movement of Christians had something in its foundation that the movement of paganism had not yet discovered and never would discover, right? Because at the core and at the center and at the foundation of this Christian movement was this value and this perspective and this way of living that actually held on to the idea of limitless sacrifice. Limitless sacrifice. The idea that those who put themselves last might actually at some point become first or be doing the most in the world. The idea that it might actually be more blessed to give things away than to receive them from others. Because listen, when the founder of your movement is said to have given his literal life for the sake of the world around him, no sacrifice becomes off limits to you, and you find yourself compelled and moved to live in a way and in a lifestyle of limitless sacrifice in the world around you, which is why I would suggest to you today that regardless of what you believe, right, regardless of what you actually believe about the foundations of the Christian faith, that Christianity in its original form creates a better world for all people, right? Christianity in its original form. Now, some of you look at that and you internally, something in you is immediately repulsed by that. You immediately push back on that because you've had experiences with Christianity that didn't create a better world for you and didn't create a better world for the sake of the people around you. And I would just say to you as we kick off this series together, what you experienced was real, it was true, it was valid, right? But I would just suggest to you that what you experienced may not have been Christianity in its original form. Because when you look throughout time, what you'll find is that every space, every region, every season, every moment of history, that Christianity had influence within, you find the world around them transformed and made better. And you probably have experienced various forms of Christianity in your life and in our world. Forms that at times are hijacked, right, by personal agendas or agendas of power designed, like hijacked to advance a movement that isn't actually in the way of Jesus, right? But Christianity, in its original form, regardless of what you believe, creates a better world for all people, which leads us to the question that I think we have to ask as we kick off this series and kick off our message today, right? Will Christianity continue to be the movement that our world needs it to be? Now, I'll just say this. A movement in our world, you look at any movement in our world, a movement in our world is only ever as strong as its next generation. A movement is only ever as strong as the generation that will follow it. You've seen this before. You've seen movements, you've seen times, you've seen faiths, right? You've seen communities of faith, you've seen organizations, you've seen family businesses that at one point thrived and at one point were ultimately successful in doing everything they were meant to do. And then at some point turned around to hand that thing off to the generation that would carry it beyond them, and found that there was no one there left to hand it to. And you've seen this in many areas, right? Many spaces you've driven through. You could find towns full of churches that one day were bustling and busting at the seams in every way possible, and today find themselves with nothing more than a shackled door because they turned around at some point and they went to hand their movement on, and there was no one left to hand it on to. Our movement is only as strong as the next generation. You got to understand this. Listen, the future of our movement is in our hands today. But it won't be in our hands every day. And it won't be in our hands forever. And what we do today and how we choose to lead and operate today when it comes to the next generation has an impact, a significant impact on the future of not just this church, but the church, the future of a movement that has spanned thousands of years, and ultimately the future of the world that's around each and every one of us. Now, I'll say this. The earliest followers of Jesus, the people who were at the very beginning of this movement, they understood this. They got this, and they lived with this right out of the gate. In fact, this movement, many of you know, right, was spurred by a guy or founded by a guy named Jesus, right? Many of you are familiar with him, right? And then after his life passed on to the earliest apostles, right, a group of leaders who were charged to carry this movement forward in their world. One of those apostles was a guy named Paul. And Paul, like many of the other apostles, began to take people under his own wings and began to invest in and develop them for the sake of continuing the movement beyond him. And Paul, one of those individuals who he took under his wings, right, who he began to influence and invest in, was a guy named Timothy. Now, Paul met Timothy in his travels. Paul would go, if you're familiar with Paul, he would go from church to church, pretty much, or from city to city, I should say, throughout the Mediterranean Sea. He'd kind of go around the sea, plant these churches in different cities, and he would meet a variety of people along the way. And at one point, Paul comes to a city and encounters a guy named Timothy, who's a younger person within the faith, who he chooses to invest in. In fact, the author of the book of Acts shares this with us. He says that Paul came also to Derbe and Lystra. These are cities along the northeastern border of the Mediterranean Sea. He says a disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was Greek, which means that Timothy was kind of like in this household with two different types of religious perspective. His mother was a Jew, but his father was Greek. His father wasn't a Jew, right? And so there were some things that Timothy might have done or been made to do as a boy that he wasn't made to do because his father wasn't a Jew. And so the author goes on to tell us that Timothy was well spoken of by the brothers at Lystra and Iconium, and Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him. Again, there was only one problem. Not everything that Jews were supposed to do were things that Timothy had done because Timothy's father wasn't a Jew. And Paul knew that there were some things that if Timothy didn't do them, the other Jewish leaders in the region wouldn't take him seriously and wouldn't accept him as the leader of the faith. So check out what Paul asked him to do. Paul takes him and has him circumcised, Because of the Jews who were in those places, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. They knew he hadn't been circumcised. And so Paul takes Timothy to be circumcised. Let's just say that sometimes leadership is a little bit painful, you know? Like, sometimes you got to carry a little extra weight for the sake of having influence, right? But Paul and Timothy, right? They jump into this together. They do whatever it takes to begin to move the movement forward. And they journey together closely from that point forward. And they go from city to city, establishing churches and developing and encouraging the faith and spurring on the movement in all the places they go. Now, after quite some time together, there comes a time where Paul actually felt called and drawn to go back to the city of Jerusalem. The only challenge with that is there were religious leaders in Jerusalem who were really mad at Paul for encouraging people towards Christianity and away from Judaism. And so Jewish leaders in Jerusalem actually wanted Paul dead. And Paul was smart, and Paul knew that if he went back to Jerusalem, it was most likely that he would find himself in the hands of these religious leaders, and that ultimately he would find himself at their hands, and ultimately he would find himself killed as well. And nonetheless, Paul, with all of his faithfulness to the movement and all of his awareness of what he felt like he was being led to do, still makes the decision to go back to Jerusalem. And so he shares that with a group of people who he's been traveling with, Timothy being one of them. And he gives them this long speech to a group of people who go, Paul, why would you actually do that? Paul, why would you go back? Paul, no, this is the last time we're going to see you if you leave us for Jerusalem. He looks at them and he gives them this long speech, basically explaining to them why he needs to go back. And he summarizes the speech at the very end by quoting the words of Jesus. He says to them, hey, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And this is more about them and what God's doing and advancing this movement than it is about what I get in return. And the author of Acts tells us that when Paul had said these things, he knelt down and prayed with them all. And there was much weeping on the part of all. This is an emotional moment for them. This is a moment of looking at their beloved leader and recognizing that this is the last time that we're going to see our beloved leader. This is a moment of grief and sadness. This isn't a see you later. This is goodbye for the last time because we're quite certain that this will be the last time. From there, Paul boards a ship and he travels to Rome, or travels to Jerusalem. And as he expected, and as everyone expected, he quickly finds himself at the hands of Jewish leaders first, and then transferred to the hands of a Roman Empire. And he finds himself in prison for quite some time, sitting on death row, awaiting his death. And as he sits on death row, he begins to fill his time by writing letters of encouragement and instruction to people throughout the areas that he'd been to before. And he chooses to take time to write a letter, not to a group of people, but to a person. And he chooses to write a letter to Timothy, the person who he's invested in, the person he's poured himself into, the person he's looking to now to carry forward the movement that he no longer gets to lead. And he begins to write this letter, and he starts this letter with words that I think are pretty important for Timothy, and I think are just as important for us today. He writes these words. He says, to Timothy, my beloved child, grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus our Lord. He says, I thank God whom I serve, as did my ancestors. I'm going to pause here for a second. That's interesting that he would even reference his ancestors, because Paul's ancestors practiced a Jewish faith, and Paul has continued beyond Judaism into Christianity, and he's looking back at his ancestors who actually didn't practice faith in the same way that he practiced faith, and still acknowledges the faith that they had, in the same way that many of us in this room may find ourselves sitting in this room with some type of a faith. A faith that maybe in some ways was influenced by our ancestors, but also is very different than the people who came before you. Yet Paul still looks back and acknowledges the ways that he received faith in some way from them, even if it was a different type of faith. He goes on, he says, with a clear conscience, as I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day, and says, as I remember your tears, I long to see you. As I remember that last moment that we shared, I long to see you, that I may be filled with joy. He goes on to say, I am reminded. Hold on to that. He's going to use that phrase twice. He says, I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois, and then your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. He pauses as he begins, it's right out of the start, right out of the gate before he says anything else. He says to Timothy, hey, I'm reminded of you, but I'm not just reminded of you when I think about you. I'm reminded of the person who came before you. I'm reminded of the person who even came before them and the faith that came to you through them. And he kind of acknowledges to Timothy that, hey, your faith came through those who came before you. You can put that up. Your faith came through those who came before you, right? In the same way that you and I many of us can look back and acknowledge that the faith that you hold today, right, didn't come from nothing, and it didn't come from no one. In fact, the faith that you have today in some way, shape, or form likely came from and through someone. For some of us, it's a generation that came before us. We can look to parents or aunts or uncles. Others of us might look a generation beyond that and look at grandparents, right? A grandmother, a grandfather, an older aunt, an older uncle, somebody who maybe shared faith with us. Others of us may look at a colleague or a peer, a friend in life who offered faith to us and encouraged us in the way of Jesus, right? But if you have faith today, right out of the gate, we just acknowledge your faith came through those who came in some way, shape, or form before you. And with that reminder, now Paul offers another reminder. He says to Timothy, for this reason, I remind you. Paul was first reminded of the faith that came through Timothy's ancestors. And now he looks at Timothy and says, I want to remind you of something critical. He says, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. In other words, hey, what you have today, what's been given to you, this movement that's been passed on towards you, right? In some ways may be a bit of kindling. In some ways may be a spark. In some ways may be glowing embers, right? In some ways it may be hot coals. But now it's your responsibility, Timothy, to do something with this. Now it's your job to take ownership of that faith that was given to you. Now it's your responsibility to fan that, not just from a spark or from kindling or from glowing embers, but to fan that into a flame that will burn and become brighter and brighter and brighter for the sake of the world around you. It's as if he's looking at Timothy and saying, hey, this movement that was passed on to you, it's in your hands now. It's in your hands now, Timothy. And as if he was anticipating hesitation from Timothy, as if he was anticipating the fear that Timothy might have and the concern that Timothy might hold, by bearing the weight of a movement, by holding on to the responsibility of advancing faith forward, as if he anticipated the hesitation, Paul's immediate next words to Timothy are this. He says, for Timothy, he says, listen, for God gave us a spirit, come on, Timothy, not of fear, no, but of power, as if to say, you have everything that you need to carry this forward. And love, as if to say, hey, it's really not about you, it's about spreading the love to all of those around you. And that love is limitless to you and can be limitless from you. And self-control, another way this gets translated is self-discipline. You can say that, go back there. Self-control or self-discipline. Right. As if to say, hey, the things that you're not sure you can do, with intentionality, combined with a love that flows through you, combined with the power that's available to you, you can carry this forward. And Timothy did. And Timothy then steps in as a leader of the movement and continues to move it forward, fanning that gift into flame. He begins to give that to another generation who would carry faith. And that generation he handed it to would then carry it forward and pass it on to another generation who would carry faith, who would then pass it on to another generation who would carry faith, who would ultimately pass it on to the point that we would find ourselves collectively sitting in this room today. And I say all of that to simply say this. Come on. What you do with the faith you've been given matters. It matters to you, And it matters to the people around you, and ultimately it matters to the world that we've been placed in to make an impact within. And I believe that when we expand our perspectives and we look future forward, one of the best things that you can do with the faith that was given to you is to take a step to invest in the faith, not of you, but to take a step to invest in the faith of the next generation. Now, I'll just tell you, this can look a few different ways in our world. And for all of us, this will look a little bit different and more personal. But let me just share with you 3 ways real quick that I believe that all of us have the chance or the opportunity to take a step to invest in the faith of the next generation. The first one's in the space of your family, right? Whatever you call family and whoever you do life with, I'm willing to bet that there is someone in your house or someone in the house of someone who you're related to who needs a person like you to come alongside them today while you have the chance to influence them today. And invest in them in a way that no one else may invest in them. And actually begin to hand your faith on to them. For some of you, this is a kid. For some of you, this is a cousin. For some of you, this is a nephew or a niece. For some of you, this is a granddaughter or a grandson. Right? But you have an opportunity in your family to pass on your faith to the next generation. For others of us, it might look a little bit more like mentorship. Someone who you're maybe not related to, but someone who you care deeply about and have proximity to, someone who you see at the ball field, someone who you see on the ski hill, someone who you see at school, at your kid's school, someone who you see in your neighborhood, someone who you see in the life of the family down the street, someone who's a family friend to you. And you have an opportunity to come alongside them and pour into the faith of the next generation through them. I'll say this, the last area, the third area, that you have an opportunity to invest. I would just say this, if you call this church your home, your church, particularly the church, this church, is a space for you to invest in the faith of the next generation. Now, I'll just tell you, you hear me say this often, but I'll just tell you, right now, today, right down this hall is the most important room in our church, right? If you've only seen this room in our church, I'll just tell you, you haven't seen the most important room in our church, because the most important room in our church is down the hall to the left, where about 60 kids every Sunday sit in co-kids. And they discover truths about the way of Jesus. They discover faith and what that looks like to live it out. Today, like right now, today, in all of those spaces, kids of all ages are having a conversation about what it looks like to actually find joy through Jesus. Can you imagine if our world had more joy right now? And today, there's a group of people in that space right now pouring into the faith of that generation, that one day they might be carriers of joy to everyone who they come in contact with. Right? Every Sunday night during the school year, every Sunday night, just down the road from here, there's a group of students who gather, right, at youth. And they gather, right, just to talk and invest and engage and talk about what it looks like to actually begin to discover a faith that's not just the past generation's faith, but a faith of their generation, this generation, right? A group of people who are asking questions and engaging in conversations that no one else in their life is giving them space to engage in, who are becoming curious about things that no one else is encouraging them to be curious about, but in such a way that they're actually beginning to ask the questions that no one else is giving them a space to ask, so they might develop a faith that no one else in their world might have, that one day they might give that faith on again. Listen, one of the best ways that you have the opportunity to invest in the faith of the next generation, I'll just tell you, is by serving in a space like that, by creating room in your life to allow students or kids to become more a part of your life, that you might actually pass your faith on to them. I'll just tell you quite honestly, as a church that is growing quickly, one of the spaces where we find ourselves always, and I hope this is always a problem, always in need, is to find people who are willing to give their faith on to the next generation. So I'm just going to say this, right? If there's any piece of you that goes, yeah, I could lean into a space like that. I could lean into a space with kids. I could lean into a space with students. There's a piece of me that wants to give a part of me on to the next generation. I just want to encourage you to let us know, right? You can do that. Let me tell you, you can do that by going to the communityco.church/next. It's the longest URL in the history of the internet, right? So if you want to scan a QR code and make that a whole lot easier for you, I'm telling you, the next generation needs you. And they need you not just to support them with your encouragement. They need you not to just clap for them every once in a while. The next generation needs you to make space in your life to give a piece of you to them, that one day they might carry this movement forward for the sake of the world around them. Now, I realize you might not take my word for it. So I want to share with you real quickly the words of someone else who I feel like represents this and lives this out in such a phenomenal way. In fact, I want to introduce you real quick to my friend Sarah. Everybody say, hey, Sarah. Sarah's pretty phenomenal. You can clap for Sarah. Somebody clap for Sarah. I think Sarah's kids clap for Sarah, just so you know. I love it. I love it. Go, Mom. Come on. I love it. Listen, we had a spot, I'll tell you real quick. Sarah has not previously served really in our student ministries and not been a part of our youth mission trips. But a few weeks ago, just before the start of this trip, we had an opportunity that popped up. We had an opening for a student leader or a leader on this trip. And Sarah, within less than a day of hearing about it, basically raised her hand and said, hey, I think I want to step into that. I think I want to step into that space. I think I want to serve with students. And I think I want to take a week out of my life to go and pour into their life. And I'll just tell you, Sarah's life, I say, it's a little bit hectic. I mean, Sarah's got a kid in college. Sarah's got, like, a teenage kid. Sarah's got, like, elementary age kids. Like, Sarah's got the full spectrum. You know what I mean? Like, if there's anybody who has an excuse to not step into a missions trip and give a week of themselves for that, it's Sarah, right? And yet Sarah jumps in at the last minute to the spot. And quite honestly, she had some hesitations about it, but she still stepped in. And I want you to hear real quick what Sarah had to say about that. She said this. She said, I have always thought about volunteering, but I guess I came up with the normal excuses on why I couldn't. Excuses like it's just too long to be away from my small children. I'd missed too much work. Am I even equipped to handle the teens? I think deep down I worried that I wouldn't know how to handle the things they were dealing with. Would I even know the right things to say? She said, while serving on the trip, I felt a lot of the judgments that I had melted away. She said, I fell in love with these students. I loved seeing them in a different light, putting aside their own wants and working together to help the community. And even after being completely exhausted, I still had a room full of girls who just wanted to connect and be real. Sleep is for the faint of heart, right? I don't know if I'd agree with that last part right there. She said, let's be honest. When people think about volunteering, kids and teenagers aren't normally the first areas they sign up for. But now I feel very confident that it's probably the most fulfilling place you can serve. This is the next generation. They need us. They need people who love Jesus deeply to love them enough to pour into them. She said, if someone were on the fence about serving, I would simply say, oh my gosh, do it. Sorry, I had to say that in my best voice. I did not do you justice, right? Oh my gosh, do it. I most certainly walked in not feeling ready, but I walked out with a heart full of love for those students. Listen, when you actually choose to create space in your heart for the next generation, I'm telling you, I've seen this happen over and over and over again. People who said at first, I don't like kids. Or who said at first, hey, kids make me feel real awkward. I don't really know what to do around kids. Or I don't know how to talk to a teenager. Or I don't feel cool enough to talk to a teenager. When you actually create space in your life for those students and for kids, I'm telling you, what you'll find is that you think you're creating a little bit of room on your calendar. But what happens very quickly is you find they start to create room in your heart. And you find yourself moved in ways you didn't expect to be moved. And you'll find yourself feeling things that you never thought you'd feel. And you'll find yourself loving them in ways that you never thought you could love. No, I'm going to say this before we wrap up. The most common response that I hear in conversations like this, when it comes to any type of serving or any type of like purpose-driven work or any type of like doing things that we all know really matters, the most common response I get is this. Hey, I'm going to jump into that. I'm going to sign up for that when I have enough time. I'm going to say this. If you wait until you have enough time, you will wait until you have no time left. And you will find yourself at the end of your time saying the same thing that you have heard so many people say, I wish I had taken time to invest in the things that mattered most. And quite honestly, what I've found is what we don't need is more time. When you actually start to push yourself, when you actually when you actually allow yourself to create just a little bit of space in your life for the things that matter most, what you'll find is that you don't just get a little bit more time. What you'll find is you actually have new priorities. And the things that once sat on the top shelf for you begin to move down to the second shelf or the third shelf. And the things that you always hoped could someday maybe make it higher in your life, they find their way to the top and the highest of shelves in a way that you would never want to change. So, I'll just say this one more time. If there's any piece of you that says, hey, it's time for me to step in. It's time for me to give a little bit more of my time to invest in the faith of the next generation, I want to encourage you to take a step, to invest in that faith. Okay? Now, let me do this real quick. In just a minute, we're going to celebrate baptisms. And I am so excited to celebrate baptisms. Let me tell you what those stories represent that you're going to hear in just a moment. The students that you're going to celebrate, the ones you're going to cheer for, the ones you're going to clap for. Those are stories that represent what God's doing in the life of a student. Those are also stories about what God has done through the lives of so many people around each and every one of these students and generations that have come before them and the generations that are serving them and pouring into them now. And so when we celebrate those baptisms, I just want to encourage you. When you cheer, I want you to cheer for them, and I want you to cheer for everyone who has poured themselves into them. And I also want you to ask yourself, when is the moment that people are going to cheer because of the thing that I poured from me into the life of someone else? Whether or not they know it was you, because of the difference that you made and the ways that you made time to give yourself away. Let me pray for us real quick, and I've got one more thing that I do want to share with us before we go. God, I thank you today. God, I thank you for the chance to be a part of a community that just gets to be so encouraged by the faith of the next generation. God, as we look at what you're doing in the life of our church, as we look at what you're doing in the life of these students, as we look at what you're doing around us, we just see you active in ways that we can't fully explain, but gosh, we are so glad to be a part of. God, for those of us in the room who have already started pouring ourselves into the next generation, be that a family member, be that a friend, be that a small group of kids or students. God, would you continue to encourage us? Would you continue to help us to fan into the flame the gift that you've given us and make much of the responsibilities that we've been handed? God, for the person in the room this morning who finds himself a part of a faith, but finds himself unsure or not sure if they're ready to start actually investing in someone else's faith. God, would you give us the courage to step in? God, would you remind us that you've not given us a spirit of fear. You've not given us a spirit of concern. God, there's nothing that we have to worry about, but that you've given us all of the power, all of the love, and all of the self-discipline that we need to make space in our lives for the things that matter most. God, we love you. We thank you for this. We trust you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.